Now, Richard, about that, now that we have such a big population and travel around and the whole Darwinian pockets that break off into different species, in what sense is the human race still evolving, and in what sense have we stopped evolving?
Well, that's a difficult question. Certainly, natural selection in the conventional sense isn't nearly so strong as it used to be. There was a time when most individuals born died before they reached adulthood, died before they were able to reproduce. So there really was natural selection in favor of ability to survive, which might have meant things like ability to run fast, keen sense organs to detect the approach of predators, the same kinds of things as affect wild animals generally. Nowadays, at least in large parts of the Earth, humans are immune to that. It's pretty easy to survive to adulthood. It's pretty easy to reproduce if you want to. And so the difference between survivors and non-survivors is no longer literally bodily survival. It's whether they reproduce. It's whether their genes survive. Some individuals do reproduce and other individuals don't. Some have lots of children, others have none. If there's any genetic component to the variation between people who do have children and those who don't, then by definition we have natural selection. I rather doubt, though, if that's having much of an evolutionary effect, because the difference between people who have large families and people who don't have children is probably a largely cultural difference or educational difference or, anyway, a non-genetic difference.
Well, you have a lot of people, and again, this falls into the condescending thing that makes me sick when people say it. But I've just recently had two kids, and the number of people who said to me, well, it's really good that you're having kids because stupid people are having so many more kids than smart people. We have to reproduce. And it always gives me this really sick feeling that I'm being talked to by someone who is just full of hate. And I wondered if you just comment a little bit more on that. You already touched on it, but that kind of thing that's being said an awful lot, I would really like you to just say that there's no truth to it if that's what you believe.
Well, there was a time when that kind of thinking was very strong, and in the early part of the 20th century, people like J.B.S. Haldane, R.A. Fisher, the great founding fathers of population genetics, would have been quite happy to say things like that. R.A. Fisher himself, who was one of Darwin's great successors in the early part of the 20th century, actually, you'll be very sorry to hear this, had an extremely large family for precisely the reason which you're I mean, he was a very, very smart man, and he believed in breeding because for that reason. That whole thing became very, very unfashionable, I think partly because of Hitler, of course, was the arch eugenicist, and Hitler was completely, as we know, screwy.
We do know that. Almost all the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, Hitler has given all kinds of eugenics a bad name. I think I agree with you that it would be a very unpleasant thing if there were to be a sort of government-organized breeding program to say let the smart people breed and encourage the dull people not to. I think that would be a horrible thing. That's different, however, from saying that it wouldn't work. And there are a lot of people who go around saying it just wouldn't work, and I fear that they're saying that because for ideological reasons they don't want it to work. But I mean, let's get away from smart and dumb and talk about something a little bit more neutral. Suppose there was a nation that wanted to win the Olympic Games, say, I don't know, win the high jump or something in a couple of 100 years' time. Some kind of breeding program in which you take male high jumpers and mate them to female high jumpers, if you were a kind of mad Hitler-type dictator, that would probably work. At least there's a good chance it would work. I hope that we don't do it, but I'm not going to come out and say that it's actually a scientific impossibility that would happen.
Well, considering the kind of goofy dogs we've created in a very short period of time, if we were allowed to completely control the breeding of humans, we certainly could get as much variation we got in dogs, right?
That's right. You could, and by the same token, you would probably get all sorts of things you hadn't bargained for. You'd think you were breeding for, I don't know, high jumping. And before you knew where you were, you'd be breeding a whole lot of people who, although they might be able to jump very high, might be absolutely hopeless at all sorts of other things. It's very, very difficult to keep a balance between the different things you breed for. So if you try to breed for, say, cleverness, or try to breed for musicianship, or try to breed for sprinting speed or something, you might succeed. But just as when you breed cows for high milk yield, you get cows that can hardly walk because their udders are so big, dangling back between their legs.
Well, that's one that's kind of related that we can see. There are also other ones that just ride on board that we'd never guess about.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. There's a fascinating piece of work on foxes that was done by some Russians, I think in the 1950s. They took foxes and they bred them by artificial selection for tameness. So they were, in effect, trying to turn foxes into dogs by breeding them for domestication, for being nice to humans, for being tame with humans. And they succeeded. But they also found that there were a whole lot of other things that came along with it. These foxes really started to look like dogs. They started to, instead of being fox-colored, they started to get black and white coloring like a collie. They started to get floppy ears like a collie. They just became dog-like in all sorts of ways you'd never have dreamed of. I mean, why on earth should you expect that if you breed foxes for tameness, you suddenly get them coming out looking like collie dogs? And that's what happened.
I was hoping you'd get to that. That's what I was kind of driving at. We're going to another little break, Richard. We'll be back with you after that. 866-570-PEN, penradio@gmail.com, penradio.com. Give us a call. Talk to, one of our biggest heroes in the world, Richard Dawkins, who's on the show with us today. This is Penn Jillette.